Hey everybody, it is Gordon Majak here, back with another episode of Timeless Pop, Rock, and Soul, and back on a rainy Saturday afternoon, and you know what that means. If it's Saturday, it must be time for the big Saturday triple play. Had to skip it last week because we had some scheduling issues there last week, but back with a bang this week and featuring one of my favorite artists from back in the day. Man, I was so into these guys, and I was lucky. I think in hindsight, I was thinking today, I think I saw this band live, I want to say 3 times during their heyday. And that's not even counting some of the solo shows as well, right? God, this album, I've been thinking about this album all day because I knew I was going to start with this first song. And man, I remember this album just clear as day from back in the day, from the summer of 1975. Remember this record, Fleetwood Mac, the self-titled Fleetwood Mac album. We all called it the White Album to differentiate it from Rumors and some of the other albums that they did later on. So we called it the White Album by Fleetwood Mac. And you know, in hindsight, I think now I have such a different perspective. I always loved this record. First of all, I remember it clear as day when it came out there in the summer of 75 and how everything sort of unfolded around this record. But in hindsight, I think it's almost like it's so weird that this was actually Fleetwood Mac, the band, and the name Fleetwood Mac. This was their 10th record. Okay, the 10th record for Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, in other words, as Fleetwood Mac. But being the first record with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, along with Christine McVie, who was already in the band from the previous incarnation of it, it really feels like in hindsight that this might as well, for all intents and purposes, have been their first record. This was really like, even though they had some name recognition, Fleetwood Mac, that name, people knew who that name was because of all the previous albums. And they'd done some great stuff before, certainly not saying that. Mick Fleetwood and John McVie and Christine McVie, going all the way back there into the 60s for Mick and John, you know, they did some great work under the Fleetwood Mac name there prior to ever coming in contact with Lindsey Buckingham. But it just feels like for that particular incarnation of the band that this was really like their first album. And I remember it so well because the record comes out in the summer of 75. And I don't think it made much noise at all there in the summer. And I don't think it was until maybe, I want to say 3 months later in the fall of 75 when radio started playing the first single off the album, which was a Christine McVie song called Over My Head. And that was just such a cool song and such a big hit. And I think that was the song that sort of put this album on the map. But that took a little while. That was several months after the initial release there in the summer before Over My Head peaked out on the charts. And then, of course, next up, they issued Rhiannon as a single. And then the rest is history. After that, this album just took off. They came back with Say You Love Me. And the run was on for this lineup of Fleetwood Mac. But this album, you know, is just such a cool record. And I thinking about this today and thinking about Rumors and Tusk and everything else that they did after this, I don't know. This might be the best thing that they ever did. Song for song, it is just one after the other on this Fleetwood Mac album. And we're going to start our Fleetwood Mac Saturday triple play with the first song on side one, because I thought, I remember playing this vinyl album and you put the record on, and if all you had heard was Over My Head on the radio, or maybe even Rhiannon if you were sort of late to the game, for me it was Over My Head. It was one thing to hear Over My Head on the radio and think, you know, that's kind of a cool, romantic, nice little pop song there, Christine McVie singing. But you buy the album and you bring the album home and you pop it on their side one, first song, and they come out swinging with Lindsey Buckingham. And that's why I say this album is really like the first album for the group, because that sound and that style and that Lindsey Buckingham that rhythm guitar, those rhythm guitar parts that just propel the whole band. His rhythm guitar just fires and is the engine of the whole band. And of course, he puts a great vocal on the top of it as well. But just that track, just that way that track just jumped off the record. And then, of course, you leave it on, and the whole rest of side one and all of side two. It's just a classic album, and just such a great record right out of the gate for this new lineup of Fleetwood Mac. And a song, Monday Morning, apparently, that Lindsey and Stevie already had worked up, and had they not joined Fleetwood Mac there in late 1974, just in time to create this album, had they never joined Fleetwood Mac, Monday Morning would have been on the next Buckingham-Nicks album, Buckingham-Nicks 2, because they already had that first duo album out before they joined Fleetwood Mac. So it's interesting that this song would very well have been a Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks solo song. Had they not joined Fleetwood Mac, they get into Fleetwood Mac, and it's the first song on side A, and what a splash it makes, and what an incredible album. What an incredible way to kick off this record that just, even all these years later, 10 million copies sold, and this record has aged so well. One great song after another, and let's hear the one that started it all. From 1975 and that Fleetwood Mac White album, it is Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks, Christine McVie, Mick Fleetwood, and John McVie, Monday Morning.
Monday morning, you sure look fine. Friday, I got traveling on my mind. First you love me, and then you fade away. I can't go on believing this way. I got nothing but love for you. Tell me what you really want to do. First you love me, then you get on down the line. But I don't mind. I don't mind. Yeah. I'll be there if you want me to. No one else I could ever do. Got to get some peace in my mind. Monday morning, you sure look fine. Friday, I got traveling on my mind. First you love me, and then you say it's wrong. You know I can't go on believing for long. But you know, it's true. You only want me when I get over you. First you love me, then you get on down the line. But I don't mind. No, I don't mind. Yeah, I'll be there if you want me to. No one else I could ever do. Got to get some peace in my mind. Don't you know, it's true. You know you only want me when I get over you. Oh, first you love me, then you get on down the line. But I don't mind. No, I don't mind. Yeah, I'll be there if you want me to. No one else I could ever do. Got to get some peace in my mind.
And that is how you announce your presence on the music scene. Holy shitola. Lindsey Buckingham, man, I will never forget playing this record for the first time, and it just jumps off the album Monday Morning, and then they go into Christine McVie. There's a beautiful ballad on side one, and Blue Letter, and Rhiannon, and it's just one great song after another. But what a way to kick off this album. And like I said, for all intents and purposes, they were a new band. Yeah, they had a track record and they had some name recognition, but certainly nothing that they could really hang their hats on. This was a brand new thing for these folks, for Mick Fleetwood and John McVie and Christine McVie, to bring Lindsey and Stevie into the band. And for Lindsey Buckingham, I mean, of course, we all know and love Stevie, so all props to Stevie. But for Lindsey Buckingham to just come in as a lead guitarist, a rhythm guitarist, a great singer, a great songwriter, he has a producer's vision of how things should sound and how things should go. Like I said, he's one of those guys you can lock in the studio for a while with all the instruments and he'll do a whole album by himself. But for Lindsey Buckingham to just show up in there with this new lineup of Fleetwood Mac and just come out swinging on the first song like this, I thought just made such a powerful statement, not only for him, but certainly for what his impact could be in this band. And you can feel it in the way Mick Fleetwood and John McVie just throw down back there behind Lindsey Buckingham on the back line of that rhythm section, man. Now, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, of course, have played some great rhythm tracks in their life, so they're no strangers to getting down in a really nice rock groove. But wow, the way they synced up with Lindsey Buckingham right out of the gate, and that just speaks to Mick Fleetwood having made that decision to invite Stevie and Lindsey into the band. Really speaks to the vision of Mick Fleetwood as sort of the main force of the band there, the final say of the band. Really speaks to his vision of what could have been when he heard some of that Buckingham-Nicks record, and based on that, invited Lindsey to join the group. And boy, he had no idea. I mean, I got to give him credit, but how could you even know that Lindsey and Stevie would come in and make an impact like this? And they go from being sort of a nice little pop rock combo that they had always been, going back to their old days, even when they started out as a blues group. But they just transcend that whole thing and blast off into an entirely different musical universe and popular universe, and they become the biggest band on the planet within about 3 years. Just an unbelievable splash for that first record. What an album. So well produced, in and of its time there in 1975, and yet all these years later, sounds incredible. The louder you turn this up, man, the better it sounds. And look at these songs. I mean, Monday Morning, Warm Ways, Blue Letter, Rhiannon, Over My Head, Crystal. That's just side one. Say You Love Me was a big hit. Landslide, epic song. World Turning, Sugar Daddy, and I'm So Afraid on side two. What a freaking record. Fleetwood Mac from 1975. Well, that gets us started with a bang, doesn't it? All right, there's part one of our big Saturday triple play for Fleetwood Mac. Let's come back here in about 2 seconds and see what I got lined up for you in part two. You're not going to want to miss it. See you in a second. Lindsey, man, what a talent. That guy is a freaking force.